Sarah, for the first 3 years of the Second World War, German U-boat crews operated with a chilling level of confidence, almost impunity.
They were the apex predators of the Atlantic, weren't they? The infamous wolf packs.
Exactly. They believed that the moment they submerged, the ocean depths gave them a cloak of absolute sanctuary. They were taught that diving meant disappearing.
An invisible hunter.
Precisely, and this belief trickled down from Admiral Dönitz himself. Their training, their tactics, their entire operational philosophy was built on this idea of invisibility.
What was that belief based on? Did they just assume the Allies had no way to find them?
It was a technological assumption. German engineers had focused on developing incredibly sophisticated passive listening arrays. Their hydrophones could hear a convoy from 100 kilometers away.
So they were built to be the perfect listeners, to find their prey in the dark.
Yes, and they assumed their enemies were relying on similar passive systems. As long as a U-boat ran silent on its electric motors, they believed they were a ghost. They were catastrophically wrong.
So, while the Germans were perfecting passive listening, what were the Allies doing?
They were working on a completely different philosophy, one born from the desperation of World War I. The British had nearly been starved into submission by the Kaiser's U-boats.
They knew they had to find a way to hunt the hunters.
And they did. At a naval school called HMS Osprey, British scientists spent the 1920s and 30s refining a system they called ASDIC. We know it today as active sonar.
So this is the technology that would change everything. How did it work?
Instead of just passively listening, ASDIC was aggressive. It sent out a high-frequency sound pulse, a ping through the water.
And then it listened for an echo.
Exactly. When that pulse struck a solid object, like the steel hull of a submarine, it reflected back. By measuring the time between the ping and the echo, an operator could calculate the exact range to the target. By rotating the transmitter, they could find its bearing.
They could see through the water.
In theory. By 1939, the Royal Navy had grown so confident in ASDIC that they believed the submarine threat was largely over. This confidence, however, would prove to be tragically premature.
Why premature? If they had this revolutionary system, why did the U-boats cause so much devastation in the early war?
Because the early ASDIC sets were crude, they were finicky, their range was limited, and operators had to wear headphones and try to distinguish a U-boat echo from whales, schools of fish, or even different layers of water temperature.
And the U-boat commanders, men like Preen and Kretschmer, quickly found that the British defences were not the iron wall they'd been advertised as.
Not at all. This led to the first happy time for the U-boat crews. They were sinking ships with terrifying efficiency, and their belief in their own invisibility was stronger than ever.
So, when did that belief finally shatter?
It shattered on May 25, 1941, in the North Atlantic. A young midshipman named Herbert Perner, on watch inside U-557, heard something. Not a propeller, something new.
A sharp, metallic, unnatural sound that struck the hull and rang through the boat like a church bell. It was the ping of an active sonar pulse.
What did that feel like? Werner wrote about it decades later. He said the sound grew faster and louder. Every man in the submarine froze. They knew, with absolute certainty, that the enemy above knew exactly where they were. In that single instant, the predator became the prey.
I can't even imagine the psychological shock. Their greatest tactical advantage, their invisibility, was just stripped away in a second.
It was a complete psychological demolition.
Vanna, who was only 22 years old, watched his veteran captain's face transform from a confident hunter into a cautious survivor. He immediately ordered a deep dive to 200 meters.
But they couldn't escape the sound, could they?
No, the pings just kept coming, faster and louder, striking the hull. Survivors from other boats described it as sounding like dried peas being dropped into a tin can. It was an artificial, precise, and terrifyingly directional sound.
And what followed the sound?
What always followed? The depth charges. For the next 7 hours, U-557 was hunted. The crew could hear the destroyer's screws thrashing overhead. They heard the splash of the charges hitting the water.
And then that unbearable weight.
They would count the seconds. 7 seconds for a charge set to 100 meters, 12 seconds for 200 meters, and then the explosions.
What did that do to the boat?
Each detonation was a miniature earthquake. The entire submarine shuddered violently. Light bulbs shattered, paint chips flew off the bulkheads, and men bled from their ears and noses. The boat groaned and popped under the immense pressure.
Mark, the conditions inside that submarine must have been a living nightmare.
They were. Werner described it in his memoir, Iron Coffins. The temperature inside the U-boat climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. The men were stripped to the waist, slick with sweat.
And the air?
The air was foul. It was thick with the smell of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and pure fear. After hours submerged, the carbon dioxide levels rose so high that men were gasping, their lungs struggling to pull oxygen from the recycled air.
And all the while, the pinging just continued.
It was relentless. The destroyer captain above had a solid contact and refused to lose it. Every few minutes, the pinging would intensify, and the crew would brace for another attack. Thin jets of seawater began spraying from cracks in the hull.
But U-557 survived. How? If the destroyer knew exactly where they were, why weren't they destroyed?
Because the captain, Otto Kopp Paulsen, was skilled, and the early ASDIC technology had one critical flaw. It had a dead zone.
A blind spot?
Yes, at a range of about 200 yards, as the destroyer passed directly over the submarine to drop its charges, the sonar pulse and its echo merged. Contact was lost for a few crucial seconds.
Giving the U-boat commander a chance to evade.
A tiny window. Paulsen used it. He dove the boat to 280 meters, far beyond its designed crush depth, and crept away. Finally, after 9 agonizing hours submerged, the pinging stopped. The destroyer was gone.
So, for a time, these early limitations gave the U-boats a fighting chance.
They did. Experienced commanders learned to exploit these weaknesses. That dead zone was one. Another was the thermocline.
What's that?
It's a layer in the ocean where the water temperature changes abruptly. These layers would bend the sonar beams, creating acoustic shadow zones where a U-boat could hide.
So, a clever captain could dive beneath a thermocline and just disappear from the sonar screen.
Exactly. They also mastered the art of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery. They learned to hide in the noise of the convoy itself, masking their own signature. Through 1941, these tactics allowed them to remain effective.
But this was, fundamentally, a technological war. That balance wasn't going to last.
It was already shifting. In 1940, in an extraordinary act of cooperation, Britain had transferred its ASDIC technology to the United States.
And the Americans, with their industrial might, took that technology and ran with it.
They didn't just run, they sprinted.
American engineers began mass-producing what they codenamed Sonar for sound navigation and ranging. They applied industrial methods, making the equipment more reliable, more powerful, and easier to produce.
So, this British-American collaboration started to close those loopholes the U-boats were exploiting.
It slammed them shut. By 1942, 3 critical improvements had transformed sonar from a useful tool into a lethal weapon.
What were they?
First, power rotation systems. Operators no longer had to turn a hand crank. Electric motors could sweep the sonar beam, meaning a U-boat couldn't slip past as easily.
What was the second?
Streamlined steel domes. The original canvas covers for the sonar created turbulence, limiting the escort's search speed to 15 knots. The new steel domes allowed them to hunt at 20 knots without losing contact.
Faster hunting. And the third?
Dual frequency systems. They could use a low frequency to find a target at a long distance, then switch to a high frequency for a sharp, precise echo as they closed in.
But Mark, there was still the problem of the U-boat diving deep, right? The sonar only gave range and bearing.
But that was the final revolutionary breakthrough. In 1943, the Allies deployed the Type 147 ASDIC.
What did it do?
It did the one thing that had been impossible until then. It could track the U-boat in 3 dimensions. It provided not just bearing and range, but depth.
Depth. That changes everything.
It made every single German tactic obsolete overnight. Diving deep was no longer safety. It was just a different place to die. Changing course didn't break contact. Silent running didn't guarantee invisibility. The sanctuary was gone. For good.
Completely. Herbert Weiner, now on a new boat, U-230, recorded the terrifying change. He wrote that in 1941, they could usually escape in an hour. By 1943, escorts held contact for 7, 8, 9 hours.
And the depth charges, they exploded at precisely their depth. Werner wrote, "It was as if they could see us." And this new lethal technology led directly to May 1943, Black May, the climactic crisis of the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied shipyards were flooding the ocean with new escorts, all carrying this advanced sonar. Very long-range aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic air gap.
And the U-boats were caught in a perfect net.
It was a slaughter. In that 1 month, 41 U-boats were destroyed. That was 25% of the entire operational force. Admiral Donitz, in a panic, ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The loss rate had become unsustainable.
What did this do to the men still out there? The psychological impact must have been unimaginable.
It was total. The steady ping, ping, ping became a death knell. Veterans called it a fingernail dragging across slate, amplified 1,000 times. It was inescapable. It was the sound of physics calculating their exact position.
And the Allies just kept innovating.
They integrated all their systems. Huff Duff could get a bearing on a U-boat's radio transmission. Radar caught them on the surface at night. And then came the ahead-throwing weapons, Hedgehog and Squid.
These eliminated that final dead zone you mentioned, didn't they?
They did. Instead of passing over the U-boat and dropping charges from the stern, these weapons fired patterns of bombs forward while the escort maintained sonar contact.
There was literally no escape.
None. The Hedgehog bombs only exploded on contact. Silence meant a miss, an explosion meant a hit, and a hit was almost always fatal.
What about German countermeasures? They must have tried something.
They tried desperately. They released chemical decoys to create bubble streams. They deployed balloons to mimic a U-boat's echo. They even tried to create an invisible rubber coating for the hull called Alberich.
And?
All of them failed. They either didn't work, fooled only new operators, or were impossible to implement. The Germans had no answer.
The final statistics of this campaign are just horrifying.
They're the highest of any military service in the war. Of the 40,000 men who served in the U-boat force, 28,000 were dead by 1944, a 75% casualty rate.
A death sentence.
And the final proof came on D-Day. Donitz ordered every available U-boat to attack the invasion fleet. It was a suicidal mission. The English Channel was a wall of overlapping sonar beams.
How did they fare?
Of the 36 U-boats sent, 25 were destroyed. They failed to sink a single major warship or troop transport. The revolutionary Type 21 Electro Boot came far too late, and as crews discovered, it was still detectable.
So the war ended, and this sound, the ping, was the enduring memory.
It was their most persistent nightmare. Herbert Werner, the midshipman from U-557, survived the war. He later immigrated to the United States and became an American citizen.
And he worked in marine engineering, didn't he?
In a final profound irony, he worked on improving the very sonar technology that had hunted him. His memoir, Iron Coffins, stands as the ultimate testament. He said they were defeated by technology they didn't understand and couldn't counter. The Allies had learned to see through water.
And that one metallic sound was the announcement of their doom.
It was the sound that marked the end of their invisibility. It was the sound that told them the ocean, their sanctuary, would no longer hide them.